9 years ago, at the age of 38, I went through a divorce from my husband Nick, who was 40 at the time. We had been married for 3 years, and he had been a good husband until a significant misunderstanding led him to leave me. Within days, he served me with divorce papers without giving me an opportunity to explain the truth. Hurt and bewildered, I didn't contest the divorce. I simply let him go. I used to be a housewife, and on one fateful day, Nick unexpectedly walked in to find my ex-boyfriend Joe, also 38, at the house with me. The three of us knew each other from college, and Joe and I had dated for only 3 months before I realized my true feelings for Nick. Joe had come over to invite us to his upcoming wedding in a few months. Nothing suspicious was happening. However, Nick assumed the worst, left without a word, and even blocked all communication channels. Despite my attempts to explain and reach out, Nick drove away and cut off all contact. Devastated, I spent the next 2 days in a state of panic and tears. Joe also tried to explain, but even he was blocked. I believed Nick's anger would subside, and he would return, allowing me to clarify everything. Unfortunately, that never happened, and a few days later, Nick filed for divorce. Feeling helpless, I decided not to fight for my marriage, and as the divorce proceedings began, I moved in with a friend until I could establish my independence. It took time, but I eventually got my life back on track, securing a job and moving into my own apartment. Though angry and hurt by Nick's actions, I chose to focus on rebuilding my life. Even after the divorce was finalized, I was content with the little I gained from it. I attended Joe's wedding, reconnecting with college friends, while Nick remained absent as expected. Life took an unexpected turn when I met Chris, a 40-year-old man, at the wedding. Although sparks flew, I held back due to my recent divorce. We exchanged numbers, but didn't connect for a while. A year later, in a better mental state, I encountered Chris again at a work event. 2 years into dating, we got married, and another year later, we welcomed our daughter. Now, almost 5 years since my divorce from Nick, I've evolved into a new person. Despite moving on, I was recently shocked when Nick, after all these years, appeared at my doorstep, unannounced a few days ago. The impact of his unexpected return still lingers, leaving me in a state of disbelief. I never figured out how he managed to locate me, and truth be told, I didn't bother investigating later on. It was a weekend, and my husband and I were both home with our daughter when the doorbell unexpectedly rang. My astonishment peaked when I opened the door to find Nick standing there, holding a bouquet of roses, and smiling as if the past 9 years hadn't happened. Before I could fully process the surreal situation, he began explaining that a few weeks ago, he learned from a friend that Joe was married to someone else, not me. He claimed to have realized he had overreacted back then and wanted a second chance, asking for forgiveness. I was at a loss for words. The absurdity of him divorcing me over a misunderstanding years ago, without seeking the truth, was baffling. Now, after 9 years of silence, he believed he could waltz back into my life and ask for a second chance, the very thing he had denied me back then. Fat chance. While he continued talking, I stared at him in silence, contemplating my next move. I wanted to slam the door in his face, but that wouldn't suffice. So, opting for a more impactful response, I instructed him to wait and return to the living room where my husband and daughter were waiting. Without time for explanations, I scooped up my daughter, motioned for Chris to follow, and headed back to the front door. You can imagine the scene that unfolded. Nick was visibly horrified as I approached him with my daughter in my arms and my husband behind me. I smiled and informed him that he was a bit too late to request a second chance now, asking him to leave. After a brief moment of silence, he turned and hastily retreated to his car without uttering another word. Satisfied with my actions, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for years. Once he was gone, I sat Chris down, recounted the encounter with Nick, and we shared a good laugh over the audacity of his belief that I would take him back without question after what he had done to me 9 years ago. I couldn't fathom why he thought it was a good idea to spring this surprise on me without doing any research first. A glance at any of my social media accounts would have revealed that I was now married with a daughter. However, I suppose he couldn't access them due to my privacy settings. Even then, he couldn't have reached out to our old friends to find out what I was up to. Chris believes he's so self-centered that he assumed I would have waited around for him after he left, hoping that he'd come back someday. It sounds like a pretty accurate assessment of his character, even though Chris has never conversed with Nick. It's been a few days since the encounter, and I hoped he would leave me alone. Yet this morning, he messaged me on Facebook from a new account, expressing how hurt he was by my actions. He claimed he genuinely wanted to apologize for the past, but felt I had made a mockery of the situation. He still feels remorse for his past actions, but believes I owe him an apology for trying to humiliate him. AITA for what I did to Nick. Update 1. I decided not to respond to Nick's message. He didn't deserve even an ounce of my sympathy or forgiveness, let alone an apology. My husband was right. Nick assumed I'd still be waiting for him and would readily accept him once he was ready to come back. He had always been self-centered, a trait I had overlooked before marrying him. There were red flags I ignored, like his discomfort with me being around other guys, even just as friends. He convinced me to quit my job and be a housewife, claiming he didn't trust anyone else to take care of our home. Despite sacrificing for him, he didn't give me a chance to explain during the divorce. I always felt Nick was excessively jealous of Joe, my first boyfriend in college. Despite being loyal, he never trusted me. After our divorce, it took me a long time to recover and give love a second chance. Some say I jumped from one relationship to another too quickly, and perhaps it's true. However, I'm glad I took that leap of faith because now I have the best husband and a beautiful daughter. I won't apologize to Nick, but I do owe him thanks. If he hadn't left me, I might still be stuck in an unhappy marriage. Update 2. I discovered a couple more details about Nick. It turns out he had deleted all his social media, and for the past few years, he had been living and working in Seoul. Consequently, he lost touch with old friends, including those from college. He returned just a month ago, got in touch with a friend who knew about Joe's marriage but not mine, and that's how he ended up on my doorstep. It's still strange that he chose to approach me after almost a decade of no contact, but I've moved on from it. He hasn't messaged me since I ignored his last message, and I doubt he will. I also informed Joe about the incident, and he was just as shocked at Nick's audacity. My daughter asked about the man, but I didn't disclose the truth, stating he had the wrong address, which satisfied her curiosity. I don't plan on telling her unless she discovers it on her own, which seems unlikely. Update 3. After almost a week of no contact, Nick texted me again. I had forgotten to block him, which was my oversight, but I'm busy with work and not dwelling on it. In the text, he expressed a desire to meet, claiming he doesn't mind my husband and daughter and still wants to give our relationship another shot, insinuating that I'd be willing to cheat on my husband. This was ironic, considering he left me for that reason 9 years ago. I was disgusted by his text, blocked his number, and made it clear I wanted him to leave me alone. His delusional belief that I still have feelings for him is baffling, and I find his messages repulsive. Update 4. Some accusations suggest I'm still into Nick, which is not true. I hate him, and I believe it's a natural sentiment given our history. I shared the text with Chris because I value honesty in my marriage, and I would never jeopardize it by engaging in any such behavior. I love Chris more than anything and would never knowingly let Nick back into my life. I acknowledge my habit of not checking who's at the door when my husband is home, and I'm working on changing that. Nevertheless, I would never intentionally welcome Nick back into my life. I have no desire to have him back in my life, so it's disheartening that people are making such accusations. I hope this clarifies things. Update 5. Nick showed up again, but this time, I didn't open the door without checking first. Thankfully, my daughter was out with my husband. I was caught up with work, and when I realized it was Nick, I told him through the door that he needed to leave and wasn't welcome anymore. Despite my clear message, he refused to listen. He informed me he was in town for a couple more weeks before leaving for another country, stating that this would be convenient for us to get together. I was appalled by his suggestion to cheat on my husband and gave him 3 seconds to leave. When he didn't take it seriously, I called the police, and they had to intervene. My daughter wasn't present, but I immediately informed my husband, Chris, who returned within an hour to ensure my well-being. I felt a bit shaken by the incident, but I'm okay. I don't know how he found out where I live. The friend who informed him about Joe being married wasn't close enough to me to know my marital status or address. I feel uneasy and uncomfortable in my own home. I'm fortunate that he's here for only a few more weeks, and I'm relying on that to keep him away. However, I'm more concerned about my daughter's safety. While he doesn't seem dangerous yet, I wouldn't put it past him. Even during the police intervention, he begged for one chance, showing signs of delusion. My husband and I are considering increasing security measures and seeking advice from his uncle, who works in the police, to address this unsettling situation. Update 6. I discovered how Nick traced me. One of my college friends gave my address to Nick's old friend without asking me first. She apologized several times, but I'm still upset about the situation. I haven't heard from Nick since the police escorted him away, but we're contemplating moving just in case he lied about his stay duration. Chris, and I don't want to take any risks, especially with our daughter attending school nearby. The situation has left me feeling paranoid and anxious. We're still contemplating a move, and ironically, the only thing holding us back is our daughter's love for our home. She has been upset since learning that we might have to leave. Any tips on how to handle this are welcome. Meanwhile, we're trying to find a solution that ensures our safety without compromising our current situation. Update 7. Nick has moved to Canada, confirmed by multiple sources. He's back on social media, and I've blocked the new number he used to text me. In his message, he claimed he believed something could have happened between us the day the police were involved, but implied I was too scared. He expressed a delusional hope that I would realize I still loved him, and that my husband was merely an obstacle. He even suggested adopting my daughter to demonstrate his devotion. I couldn't fathom such delusion, but at least he's gone. I'm relieved I no longer have to deal with this, and that we didn't have to move. My daughter's happiness in staying in her beloved home is what matters most. Knowing we're not in danger has lessened my worries, although we're keeping security measures in place for added reassurance. Chris and I read Nick's final message together, finding it ridiculous that he still believed I would want him after seeing my family. I shared the text with Joe, who had a similar reaction. I'm still not speaking to the friend who gave Nick my address, as her actions were irresponsible and unforgivable. Regardless, Chris and I are planning a vacation to the beach, my daughter's favorite place, to let off some steam. These past weeks have been incredibly stressful, and I feel like I've earned a break. Thanks for all the love and support, and stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships. My mother's furious voice echoed through the house, commanding me to leave. The intensity of her anger was palpable, and she gripped a kitchen knife tightly in her hand. In her rage, she disowned me, accusing me of being a burden and not contributing to the household expenses. The irony stung, as I contributed more than half of my $3,000 monthly income to the family. Desperate to make her understand, I attempted to explain, but she remained obstinate, brandishing the knife as a chilling display of her frustration. Cautiously, I kept my distance, mindful not to provoke her further. My name is Catherine, a 29-year-old systems engineer at a major corporation. My journey into this career was inspired by my father's love for computers. Despite my successful career, a sudden turn of events shook our lives. My father, the source of my inspiration, suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage, leading to immediate surgery. Although the operation was successful, the aftermath hinted at lasting effects, raising concerns about our financial stability without his income. While I dedicatedly juggled my demanding job and caregiving responsibilities, my mother's priorities shifted. Instead of offering support, she focused on my father's ability to return to work during his recovery. Witnessing his struggles, I suggested I take on the role of caregiver, but my mother dismissed the idea, citing her busy schedule. Returning home to care for my father, I found myself shouldering not only caregiving duties, but also the entire burden of household chores. Despite her initial claims of self-sufficiency, my mother had neglected the chores, leaving me overwhelmed with the responsibilities. Juggling work, caregiving, and household tasks became a daunting challenge. Meanwhile, my father, though physically weaker, expressed gratitude and apologized for the trouble. Undeterred, I reassured him and cherished the moments spent together. Despite my efforts, my mother continued to criticize, finding fault in my cooking and questioning my commitment as a daughter. Determined to address her concerns about my father's nutrition, I adjusted my approach, preparing smaller dishes to accommodate his changed appetite. After increasing the variety of dishes, my mom remained silent. A few days later, she complained that there were too many dishes in the meals, citing my parents' age and their inability to consume such quantities. She questioned my ability to save money, noting that I had been living alone until now. In response, I explained that I added more side dishes not because she instructed me to do so, but to prevent Dad from getting tired of the food and to stimulate his appetite. Mom accused me of having an attitude, as if she had been constantly nagging and undoing my efforts. Reluctantly, she moved to the sofa and demanded coffee. As I cleaned up, she threw a cushion at me, insisting I hurry up and make coffee, claiming that I'm always at home, not working, and just after Dad's retirement money. Despite my attempts to clarify that I work from home, she failed to understand. In her perception, I apparently moved back home under the pretense of taking care of Dad, without contributing to living expenses, despite my efforts in caring for Dad, earning money for our living expenses, and managing all the housework. She believed I was misusing Dad's retirement money. Frustrated and reaching my limit, feeling sorry for Dad but unable to continue living in the same house, I accompanied him to physical therapy a few days later. The doctor's encouragement was overshadowed by the sight of Mom hastily leaving home with large bags upon our return. The next day, I discovered that all my cherished bags and accessories were gone. Confronting Mom, I questioned if she had entered my room. Justifying her actions, she claimed it was her house, and she could enter any room. I inquired about a luxury brand bag she had, criticizing her spending on such items despite advising me not to waste money. Angry and upset, I learned that she had sold my bags and accessories without consulting me. The significant amount of money was used for her own hobbies. Shouting in frustration, I demanded the return and repayment. However, my mom, transformed into a figure of anger, yelled back, unable to believe her own daughter was talking back, resembling a confrontation with a demon. During my childhood, I obediently listened to my parents and worked hard for them. Now, as an adult, I find myself taking care of them. Despite my requests for my mom to contribute in caring for Dad, she claims to be doing her part while, in reality, she is the one receiving the most care. It's disheartening to witness my dad, who has resigned himself to the lack of care from my mom, still making efforts to communicate with her, only to have her vanish when he starts talking. Lost in contemplation, I confronted my mom, who remained silent. Suddenly, she turned away from me, stormed to the kitchen, and returned with a kitchen knife, a furious expression on her face. In a fit of rage, she demanded that I leave, accusing me of being a parasitic leech, waiting for my dad's retirement money. Frustrated by the realization that my efforts and words were falling on deaf ears, I decided it was time to find a new place and swiftly move out. Slowly distancing myself from my mother, I rushed into my room when she made no attempt to follow. Despite expecting not to feel sadness due to her usual emotional distance, tears welled up, fueled by intense anger. Swiftly, I began preparations to move out. I sought assistance from a colleague at work who had connections in real estate. With their help, I quickly found a new place. During my free time, I packed my belongings into boxes. When everything was ready, I'd opened up to my dad about my mother's behavior. He expressed regret and apologized, acknowledging that he had sensed something was amiss but struggled to address it. He revealed that my mom had treated him poorly too, and he was contemplating a divorce. Grateful for my support, he thanked me and agreed with my decision to move out. A few days later, when my mom was away at her hula dance classes and lunch with friends, we seized the opportunity to move. Movers arrived on a Wednesday morning when we were confident she wouldn't be home. As our belongings were loaded onto the truck, a sense of sadness crept in. In a rented car, my dad and I embarked on our journey to escape my mom's toxic environment. He questioned if it was the right choice, suggesting I could have taken the chance to be free from caregiving. Assuring him it was the right decision, I expressed how happy living with him made me feel. The move was completed by the afternoon, and over takeout lunch we reminisced. I apologized for the convenience store lunch boxes, and my dad shared that we used to eat them often before my return. Even the simplest conversations made the meal taste delicious. After a break, we began unpacking and settling into our new life. Just as we were getting accustomed to the change, the phone rang. It was my mom. I answered the call, and my mother immediately panicked, questioning why our belongings were gone. I calmly informed her that Dad and I had made the decision to move out together. Concerned about living expenses without Dad's pension and retirement fund, she doubted our ability to afford a high-rise condo. I reassured her, explaining that I had a stable job and contributed financially to the family. However, she accused me of spending Dad's retirement fund on designer bags, despite my clarification that I had been supporting the family. I reminded her that Dad had tried to communicate my job situation to her, but she had never listened. Money was her primary concern, and her financial management was careless. Growing impatient, Dad dropped a bombshell. We were getting a divorce. Mom panicked about her living expenses, but Dad assured her that she could live freely without interference. He mentioned sending divorce papers for her to sign later and hung up without further explanation. Dad apologized for making me feel bad, and I expressed my gratitude. The next day, we headed to the hospital for Dad's appointment. Unexpectedly, we found my mother waiting near the entrance. She approached, inquiring about the previous day's phone call and asserting that she wouldn't allow us to live in a nice place by ourselves. Suddenly, she grabbed my hand, insisting on living in the high-rise too. Despite my calm demeanor, she refused to accept our decision. I asked her to let me live my own life, but she persisted, leading me to threaten calling the police. Eventually releasing her grip, she hurriedly left as hospital staff and security approached. I apologized for the commotion, attributing it to my mother's actions. A subsequent argument took place, and as I observed my mother's back near the hospital entrance, she seemed weaker than usual. In the days that followed, she tried to find us around the hospital, but only confronted people she perceived as weaker. After being chased away by security guards and assertive patients, she stopped showing up. That hospital encounter marked the last time I saw my mother. Subsequently, my father consulted a lawyer and actively pursued the divorce process. Unhappy about the divorce, my mother made a fuss demanding money. The lawyer explained alimony, but when she realized she wouldn't receive any, she resorted to tears and begging. The lawyer directed her to financial assistance centers, and the divorce process continued. Eventually, the divorce was finalized, and my father decided to sell the house. Initially opposed to the idea, my mother changed her stance upon learning she would receive money from the property division. After selling the house, our lives became more peaceful. Juggling work, caregiving, and housekeeping, I found support in daytime caregivers, and Dad's condition gradually improved. One day, my mother called, requesting money. I declined, stating that I couldn't provide more and asking her to leave us alone. Despite changing my number to stop her calls, she persisted using different numbers. Later, I heard from mutual acquaintances that she was living in a small apartment, working part-time, and barely managing on her own. Dad, upon hearing this, remarked that she had finally learned to stand on her own 2 feet. Reflecting quietly, I admitted that he might have spoiled her too much. When I asked if he was happy now, he thanked me and apologized for the trouble life had caused me. I, A 26-year-old woman was set to be married last week. However, the wedding didn't take place because I made the decision to run away the night before the ceremony. I had been engaged to my 26-year-old boyfriend for 6 months, and we had been in a relationship for 3 years. We'd also shared 2 children, twin boys who were now 1 year old. The arrival of our unexpected twins had initially caused tension, as my boyfriend was against having kids at that time. Despite his reluctance, I insisted on keeping the babies and gave him the option to leave without demanding child support. I believed in my ability to raise my children independently due to my strong maternal instinct. Over time, my boyfriend came around, supporting me throughout the pregnancy and proving to be a good father after the twins were born. 6 months later, he proposed and I accepted. We began planning our wedding, and everything seemed perfect. My parents were thrilled, as they liked my now ex-boyfriend. However, the night before the wedding, a phone call changed everything. We were following the tradition of staying in separate places, and after a heartfelt conversation, he forgot to hang up the call. I remained on the line out of curiosity and overheard a conversation between him and his father, revealing a side of him that made me question our 3-year relationship and the impending marriage. I decided to eavesdrop on their conversation, motivated by my ex-boyfriend's dejected and distant tone when confirming to his dad that he was talking to me. Something felt off, and the subsequent exchange still echoes in my mind a week later. His dad questioned whether my ex still felt the same way as he did 2 days ago, and my ex affirmed. His mother joined the conversation, insisting that regardless of his feelings, he needed to go through with the wedding. This sparked a heated response from my boyfriend, asserting his autonomy and refusing to be pushed around. His dad, however, made a weighty proposition, stating that while they couldn't force him to marry someone he didn't love, they could cut him out of their will. His mother, in turn, lectured him about responsibility, emphasizing that as a father, he needed to grow up and commit. She argued that if he was ready for kids, he should be ready for marriage. My ex expressed his frustration, feeling coerced into marrying me despite not feeling ready, solely to avoid being disinherited. He lamented about the lack of consideration for his readiness for milestones in his life, feeling unfairly pressured into situations he wasn't prepared for. In his complaints, he stormed out, leaving his phone behind. His parents continued to discuss his perceived irresponsibility, prompting me to end the call. Stunned and unsure of what to do, I realized that my boyfriend had agreed to marry me under the threat of disinheritance, a revelation that shook me on the eve of our supposed wedding day. I couldn't fathom the situation for the next couple of minutes. None of his recent behavior had hinted at his unpreparedness. Yes, we had our initial argument when I discovered my pregnancy, but since then, he had been a devoted boyfriend and father. His true feelings were hidden behind a remarkable acting facade. Once I gathered myself, I made a swift decision to escape. Fortunately, my kids were with me, so I drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town. Arriving late, I settled my fussy kids and blocked my boyfriend and his family without explanation. That night, I cried, realizing the past year had been a colossal lie. Eventually, around 4 a.m, I found some sleep. The wedding expenses were covered by my ex's affluent parents, relieving me of financial concerns. I texted friends and family that the wedding was off, promising to explain later. I made it clear I didn't want them involved with my ex or his family, trusting they'd respect my wishes. On what was supposed to be my wedding day, I stayed in the hotel, grappling with my emotions and finding solace in my son's company. Despite my devastation, I maintained a strong front for their sake. A day later, I returned home to gather my belongings and move out. After leaving my kids with my parents, I faced my ex's expected reaction. He appeared sleep-deprived, panicked, and concerned. Unsure of the authenticity of his emotions, he demanded an explanation for my actions, asserting that my decision warranted an apology to him and his family, dismissing cold feet as an unacceptable excuse for humiliation. I didn't say much. I simply informed him that I had overheard his conversation with his parents the other day. He appeared confused for a moment, and when it sank in, He couldn't hide the shame. I didn't feel the need to elaborate or engage in further conversation. After uttering those words, I entered the house while he waited outside in the yard. Gathering the essentials, I left without exchanging another word. There was nothing left for me to say. He had acted according to his beliefs, and now I was doing what I believed was right. I no longer aspired to be a wife. My focus shifted to being a devoted mother. Almost a week passed without communication, and I thought it was the end for us. I had nothing to express, and he seemed to share the sentiment, or so I believed. However, a few hours ago, he unexpectedly appeared at my parents' place, pleading to speak with me. By now, my parents and close friends were aware of the situation, and they hesitated to let him in. Despite their reservations, I agreed to talk to him one last time. I opted to stay in the front yard, fearing a heated argument that might disturb the sleeping babies. In our conversation, he apologized for everything he had put me through. He professed his love for me, admitting he wasn't ready for marriage. He expressed affection for our children and insisted on being a part of our lives despite the revelations from that night. I found myself at a loss for words, grappling with doubts and trust issues. While he wanted a second chance without his parents' interference, I was uncertain about the path forward. He expressed a desire to work things out, but I couldn't ignore the deception that had persisted for almost a year. Now faced with the decision of whether to give our relationship a second chance, I'm torn. I want my kids to have a relationship with their father, but trust is a significant hurdle. As for myself, a break seems appealing, especially after this tumultuous week. I'm undecided about the future of our relationship. Update. Hey, everyone. It's been a while, and I appreciate the overwhelming support. I've been busy with work, kids, and moving out. The advice I've received has been incredibly helpful. I consulted a lawyer about custody arrangements, and I've decided to pursue full custody. Some people have sent hurtful messages, accusing me of being a selfish mother for considering reconciliation. I want to emphasize that I'm a mother, but I'm also a human being. It's only been a week since that phone call, and moving on completely is a process. This was a 3-year relationship, for goodness sake. In the throes of strong emotions, I genuinely loved him, and that vulnerability led me to consider reconciliation. However, as I've regained stability, I recognize the imperative of prioritizing myself and my children. Despite the initial hurtful judgment on the internet, I anticipated it in this digital age. 2 days after calling off the wedding, I began the search for a lawyer, a process that took time as I sought someone I felt comfortable with and could trust completely. Custody discussions were never part of our prior conversations, as we never foresaw such a circumstance. Now that we're at an impasse, I believe it's crucial to take legal measures to secure my children's well-being. While I doubt my ex's desire for custody, I'm wary of his conservative and orthodox parents who may object to their son not having custody of their grandchildren. I'm preparing for potential challenges. Our last conversation was around 3 days ago, and the lack of contact since then reinforces that, regardless of his words, he's not ready to be with me or willing to make the necessary changes. His recent expressions of wanting to make things work appear hollow and meaningless. The eroded trust between us makes it clear that I won't be with a man who doesn't genuinely want to be with me. Ending the relationship is the best course of action. I plan to communicate my decision soon, hoping it won't escalate into a custody dispute. Update 2. I've informed my ex that I won't be getting back with him and that I intend to file for full custody. I assumed he would understand, given his earlier admission of not being ready for marriage or kids. However, he reacted poorly, engaging in arguments and insisting I couldn't make this decision. I expected him to appreciate not being forced into something he wasn't prepared for. But his reaction has heightened the challenge. Oh, okay. Good on you for managing preschool then. I got her in because I was diagnosed with depression after my husband's death. I got a doctor's note and everything. Wow, I didn't know that was an option. Anyway, the reason I came today is that I need advice. Elizabeth's next statement left me shocked. Would you mind paying our property taxes? What? What property taxes? Where is this coming from? We don't have money to pay property taxes. Why would you think we'd pay it for you? You said we could ask you for anything, didn't you? Well, yes, but plus you guys were the ones who insisted we live on that land. We never insisted. Regardless, property taxes for that land are higher than other places, and it's really causing us problems. Why don't you just work a bit and pay yourself? I can't work. I've even got Emily in preschool based on the excuse that I can't work due to mental illness. That's not our problem. Please, if we can't pay the property tax, we won't be able to live in that house. Look, I don't know all the details, so I'll discuss it with Robert when he gets home. Please do. After showing up out of the blue and making such an unexpected request, Elizabeth left. When Robert got home, I told him about Elizabeth's sudden visit and her asking us to pay property taxes. Of course, Robert was surprised, but he was also angered by her audacity. A few weeks later, we invited Elizabeth over to our house to discuss something important. We timed it so that her daughter, Emily, was at preschool, allowing the three of us to talk. Elizabeth arrived in a good mood. She probably thought we were going to help her with her property taxes. Robert, it's been a while, Elizabeth greeted. You seem well. I heard from Jennifer, but let's hear it from you. What do you want to talk about? Well, I hate to be a bother, but I came to ask for help with the property taxes, she admitted. Why can't you pay them yourself? Is there a reason? I'm still dealing with emotional stress and can't work. With a young child, I just don't have the money for the taxes. So you can't handle unexpected expenses. Exactly. The property taxes are way too high. After all, it was you guys who decided we should buy that house on that land, so it's your responsibility to help us out. Why? You had the money in the first place. I'm a single mom, and it's tough. Survivor's benefits alone don't cut it. I'm barely making ends meet and can't handle sudden expenses like taxes. You're lying about not having money, Robert retorted. I'm not. I lost a breadwinning husband. Are you out of touch with reality? If you think I don't know anything, Robert said something rather cryptic. Hearing those words, Elizabeth's expression changed slightly. Whoa, you're scaring me, Robert. You're getting more than just survivor benefits, aren't you? What are you talking about? That's all I get, she defended. It's pointless to lie. I know everything. You're getting money from life insurance too. Elizabeth remained silent. My brother had life insurance, you know. He was insured for about $1,000 a month until about age 60. So, as his wife, it's my right to receive that money. You have no right to question me. But you do get a good amount of money every month with survivor's benefits and the insurance money, don't you? It's still not enough for everyday living. We have a mortgage. You've paid off the mortgage, haven't you? Don't you also get various other forms of assistance? How do you know all this? My brother consulted with me about everything, especially financial matters. So I know it all. I see. But like I said before, I'm his wife, and Emily is his daughter. How we use that money is none of your business. Fair point. But since money is coming in, you should manage it properly and pay your own taxes. Robert, you work for a big corporation, and you're rich. Why can't you just help us out a little? You're being too stingy. Elizabeth still seemed unconvinced, listening to this conversation. I finally understood why Elizabeth, even after losing her husband, continued to live lavishly without working. I couldn't complain. Money was something her late husband left for her. But Robert wasn't done talking, and that's when I learned an unbelievable fact. So earlier, you said the kid is James's. Is that true? What are you talking about? Of course it is. Well, that's good because if it's not, we have a big problem. Isn't that quite rude? I just lost my husband. Don't start accusing me of things. I, who had been silently listening, quickly interjected. That's crossing the line, man. But Robert continued. You see, my brother consulted me when he found out about their pregnancy. What about him? He said that judging by the due date, there's no way the child could be his. What do you mean? He was always on an extended business trip, and hadn't been home during that time. He was worried that the child might not be his. That's absurd. I thought so too initially. James said there was no evidence of an affair. Then he passed away before we could gather any. So it was a misunderstanding, right? After James was gone, I couldn't shake off the thought. So I investigated. What? Whether you have been unfaithful? My jaw dropped next to me in a state of shock from this newfound information. Robert continued speaking to Elizabeth. I was planning to take my time gathering evidence, but since you came to our home, I hurried my investigation. And what did you find? You're living with another man now, aren't you? So what if I am? He's someone I started seeing after my husband passed. I see. I was wondering if the man you're living with is the child's father. But it turns out he's not Emily's father. It's your brother, H. Do you have any proof? Sorry to say, I approached Emily and the man at the park and got a single hair strand from their clothing. That's creepy. I do feel a bit guilty, but it's for my brother. And what did you do with it? James is no longer with us. So I submitted the hair, along with mine, for a DNA test. According to Robert, even if it's not from the father, a close relative can provide enough genetic information for a paternity test. Robert went on. The test showed that Emily is not James's child. Elizabeth looked down, unable to speak. Then she finally spoke, almost in a whisper. So what does that mean? It's heartbreaking for James. Speaking ill of the dead accomplishes nothing, maybe. But since my brother can't find justice, I plan to file a lawsuit against you and your lover for damages. What are you talking about? We're getting married soon. Oh, really? Well, that makes things easier. Since the house is already paid off, you should just sell it. Then you can use that money to pay for both your compensations. Why should I? If you can afford the compensation, you're welcome to stay. But your fiancé doesn't work right. How do you know that? You can get by without working now. But that changes when you're married. It's none of your business. The conversation was far from over, and an angry Elizabeth tried to leave. Robert spoke up. I'll handle the property taxes for you. I'll also start the process for selling the house. Angry, Elizabeth stormed off and eventually sold the house, just as Robert suggested. The house sold quickly due to its desirable location and being relatively new. Elizabeth paid the compensation with the money from the sale. Apparently, Elizabeth and her man got married. But because of that, she would no longer receive the survivor's benefits she had been getting due to her husband's passing. Ignorant Elizabeth had no clue about this. She bought a cheap used house with the money from the sale. No longer a single mom, her financial aid dried up, as did the survivor's benefits. Both Elizabeth and her new husband had to start working. Elizabeth, once a spender on fashion and beauty, marked the start of a tougher life. Her husband couldn't keep a job, and the marriage soon fell apart. Elizabeth was back to being a single mom, but now with no financial aid coming in, she had to work desperately to make ends meet. For us, the storm has passed, and our peaceful days have returned. We were even blessed with a child we had longed for. I can't wait to meet the child that I will have with my beloved Robert. We will give our child the middle name of my late brother-in-law, ensuring that his memory will always be with us. In my second update, I confronted my ex, expressing my decision not to reconcile and notifying him of my intention to file for full custody. I anticipated he would understand, considering his previous admission of not being ready for marriage or kids. I believed he should have felt grateful that I wasn't pushing him into an unprepared role. However, he reacted poorly, engaging in arguments and insisting I couldn't do this to him. He suggested that breaking up was acceptable, but taking his kids away wasn't. This argument might have made sense in a typical relationship, but our circumstances were far from ordinary. As you already know, my ex had initially opposed having kids, and until a week ago, he wasn't ready to be a father. Suddenly, he was fiercely fighting for custody, raising suspicions of external influence, likely from his controlling parents. During our argument at a restaurant, I attempted to calm him down, embarrassed by the scene he was causing. In an effort to avoid a protracted custody battle that I couldn't afford financially or energetically, I sought a rational conversation. I knew his parents could afford top-notch lawyers, potentially dragging out the legal process. My approach was to reason with him and hope he wouldn't contest custody. I reminded him of his previous stance on not being ready for kids until a week ago, asserting that my proposed arrangement was in the best interest of all involved. I suggested he could live his life unburdened by marriage and kids, while I took care of our children. However, he claimed to have changed his mind, asserting he was now ready to be a father. This sudden shift seemed suspicious, leading me to inquire further. He admitted that his parents pressured him to fight for custody after they learned about the canceled wedding. They accepted that I wouldn't marry him but insisted on joint custody to retain a connection with their grandchildren. Threatened with disinheritance, he begged me to agree to joint custody, but I was disgusted and chose to leave. I couldn't fathom that once again, he was succumbing to his parents' influence, even when I had given him an easy way out. He didn't want to be a father or commit to me. His primary concern was his parents' wealth, driving him to such lengths. If his sole focus was their money, I didn't want him anywhere near our kids. They deserved better. Rejecting child support, I made it clear I didn't want him involved with me or my children. His lack of backbone, willing to do anything to stay in his parents' good graces, was disappointing but unsurprising. Since then, I've blocked him everywhere, refusing to engage in any communication. His last message proposed a joint custody agreement with the promise of splitting his inheritance once his parents passed away, an absurd suggestion that revealed his true priorities. Falling for a spoiled individual was my mistake, as a self-made woman who worked hard for everything. Despite his initial efforts to change, it became evident that he was a skilled actor who had deceived me for 3 years. Now, I see him for who he truly is, and I have no interest in exploring more about him. I am done and content with raising my kids on my own. No father is better than one who rejects fatherhood. I am confident that I made the right decision, hoping he comes to his senses and terminates his parental rights rather than dragging this into a prolonged custody battle. I'll continue praying. Update 3. Hello, everyone. It's been a while, and I'm here to share some good news. Although it's been a lengthy period since the last update, I've been occupied. First and foremost, my babies and I have moved into a smaller apartment that I can now call mine. Unlike the house I shared with my ex, this place is near my parents' house. So my parents can visit occasionally to keep an eye on the kids. Additionally, I've hired a full-time nanny to assist me because I can't afford to stop working. I consider myself incredibly fortunate to be able to afford such help right now. Financially, my parents are providing support, and I am immensely grateful for their assistance. None of us saw this situation coming, but they're doing their best, and I'm truly appreciative of having such loving and supportive parents. Now, onto the part I know people are curious about, my ex. Well, he has officially signed away his parental rights. I can't pinpoint exactly what prompted this change, but my best guess is that he decided to stand up to his parents, or perhaps they finally relented. According to a friend, he has moved out of his previous residence, indicating a shift in his circumstances. He apologized to me once again and expressed a desire to offer financial compensation. However, I declined, as I had no intention of accepting money from my ex-boyfriend. Despite potential criticism for this decision, I remain steadfast. While I've forgiven him, it doesn't mean I have to accept any form of compensation. I simply want to move on, and with my parents' support, we are fully capable of raising my kids without his involvement. I conveyed to him that it was okay, but requested no further contact, a boundary he has respected so far. Currently, my focus is solely on my kids, striving to provide them with the best life possible. I have no time for sadness or anger towards my ex. My energy is devoted to being the best mother I can be for my children. That's the update for now, and stay tuned for more stories from Argo relationships. Second story. My name is Jennifer, and I'm married to Robert. Robert has a younger brother named James, who is 3 years younger than him. The woman James brought home as his future wife, Elizabeth, turned out to be surprisingly inappropriate. "Hey, I'm getting married," James said with genuine happiness, introducing us to his fiancée. "Hi, I'm Elizabeth. Nice to meet you." Elizabeth was a flashy dresser adorned in designer brands, her bold makeup making her initially intimidating. However, after talking to her, we discovered she was outgoing and charming. We were genuinely happy for our brother-in-law's upcoming marriage. Robert's parents, unfortunately, had both passed away, his mom when he was in 7th grade, and his dad 2 years ago. As a result, neither Robert nor his brother-in-law have parents anymore. "I bet Mom and Dad are celebrating your news up in heaven," Robert remarked. "Look, I've been depending on you for so long, Robert. I don't expect that to change once we're married," James added. "Don't say that, or I'll be taking care of you forever," Robert replied, and they both laughed joyfully, showcasing their close bond. As we absorbed the sudden engagement news, I inquired about their future living arrangements. "So where are you guys planning to live after getting married?" I asked. "We're thinking of building our own place. The thing is, I travel a lot for work, so we're still undecided on where to build," my brother-in-law answered. Since he often had to travel for work, deciding on a location posed a challenge. "We don't have reliable parents to lean on. If we live near each other, we can help one another if something happens," he explained, highlighting the importance of their close relationship. I concurred, acknowledging that my parents lived far away, and it seemed Elizabeth, his spouse, also had no parents nearby. "That sounds like a good plan," I said. However, Robert and I weren't as affluent as Robert, so the decision to live nearby posed a financial challenge. Though the idea was initially a casual suggestion, they took it seriously and moved into a house relatively close to us. After settling in, we frequently enjoyed barbecues and drinks together, creating pleasant memories. Months later, they received the joyful news of a baby on the way. Tragedy struck, though, as my brother-in-law, elated about the impending arrival, met an untimely end on his usual work trip. Robert was consumed by grief, mourning the sudden loss of his beloved brother. Strangely, Elizabeth, his spouse, didn't appear as devastated as one would expect, considering the circumstances. While she did shed tears, they seemed artificial, leaving me uneasy. Concerned, I reached out to her, offering support for anything she might need after the baby arrived. "Thank you," she replied. But that was the last we saw of Elizabeth. Months later, a birth announcement arrived, prompting us to visit. However, she claimed to be too busy to invite us in, so we left the gift at the door and returned home, bewildered by the inability to see the baby. Our distrust toward Elizabeth grew as she consistently avoided us, citing business whenever we tried to connect. A year passed since my brother-in-law's death when, out of the blue, Elizabeth showed up at our house. "It's been a while, Jennifer. Long time no see. How have you been?" she greeted. Confused, I inquired about the sudden visit. "I came because I need some advice," she explained. When asked about Emily, her response was surprising. "Emily's at preschool. Being alone at home with her all the time was driving me crazy. I enrolled her right after she was born." "Oh, I see. Are you working then?"